Hello, everyone. Welcome here today on our World Futures Day celebrations. And today we have a beautiful, amazing, very creative, and very ingenious woman. Her name is Michelle James. And Michelle, we welcome you. My name is
Thank
Venucia, and I'm so grateful to be here with you today. Michelle, let me tell you about Michelle before we really dive into our theme today. I'd rather not call it a topic because with these things, they unfold in their own way. And Michelle is a master of improv. So no need to have anything, up front ready. We just go with whatever emerges. As her organization is called the Center for Creative Emergence, and she's the CEO and founder. And I just want to share with you what she's doing. She's helping leaders, facilitators, and coaches bring more original creativity into their work and out of their groups, helping teams and organizations consciously create what is next with whole brain creativity and emergence workshops, coaching, products, and events, both in person and also virtual. So the world is our oyster. So wherever you are, you can reach out to Michelle. And I have co-created with her before, and we both love the world of creativity and yeah, everything that goes with it. It's such a vast, vast field. So, Michelle, first of all, before we dive into the topic of something about how can we prepare for the future in a more empowered and prepared way by using creativity, but specifically breaking patterns. Now, you are the author of Pattern Breaks, and we'll
you.
talk a little bit about that as well. So, I'm curious, what inspired you to begin the Center of Creative Emergence way back in 2001, I believe. So it's quite some time. What was it that,
Right.
what was that impulse? Because I think that impulse is something that can help us to stay more calm when we think about the future.
Yeah, that's a great way of seeing it. Well, I will say it was sort of a confluence of events that that started even earlier than that. But what and it would one event was I was when I got out of college and I was working at a radio station. I was selling radio advertisements, plus I was doing the creative. Like we got to at that time design our own advertising, and I loved it. And then we had a guy come in and he said, "Let's get everyone who's good at sales just only do sales. Let's get all the other people to do." And so because I was bringing in money for the station, they put me in the sales group, and all of a sudden my sales went down a lot because I didn't get to have the balance of getting to use
Ah,
my creativity in the way, not that sales can't be creative, sales can be very creative, but in the way that I was really felt alive to create. So that was when I really was thinking, I absolutely need to bring more creativity into my work. And meanwhile, I was, taking art classes, theater classes. I'd always wanted to be more creative, but I, like many people, grew up saying, art, all the creative is what you do after the real work is done.
mm,
And so it took me several years and a variety of explorations before I was finally able to integrate it into a company that I called Creations Unlimited at that time. But we were doing the creativity for our clients. I had a team of creatives and we were doing it. And one day it just sort of hit me that I would like to bring out the creativity in them, not do it. And so I met a man who became a business partner, and we created this Proteus Center for Change for a couple of years. He was much older and he had retired. He needed to retire, and so I just after that I thought, and that was an organizational development group. And I felt I just wanted to bring creativity in because everything, when I was noticing anything around creativity, it expedited all the learning. So I kind of hung. I one thing I'll just say that was important as he and I were trying to work together. I noticed that he and I both we had very similar visions, but we had very different creative styles and very different approaches. And so, in order for us to make it work, I started learning about a third way. Not my way or his way,
mm,
but this third way. And I started really understanding principles of emergence. How do you co-create with someone who has a very different creative style and way of being. So we would go through it, and it took a while, but we eventually were able to co-create. And then sadly, he had to retire. He had some family personal stuff. And so after that, I decided, I want to whole everything I've learned with creativity and creative emergence, I want to dedicate my life to. So I started a center for creative emergence on my own. And then that sort of began my learning process. They say you teach what you most need to learn. Like I was facilitating it and learning it and learning it and learning it. And then I started a Capital Creativity Network in DC in 2003 that went on for many years and brought in various presenters, and we did all kinds of things there. So it was kind of a process, not a one event, but a unfolding. Yeah.
That's wonderful. As you were speaking about sales, maybe I can just share a little bit of my own experience with that.
Oh, yeah.
When I was in consulting, they also wrote me in on what they call business development. And it was just a glorified name for sales. And but I was very fortunate. I was working in a big consulting house, which were very prim and proper. I wouldn't call the name out today, but it was all, with a book. Everything must be done by the book, very, very linear based thinking and so forth. But they did something incredible. They allowed me the freedom that I could do whatever I wanted. So I did some crazy stuff at this time, but it was so much fun. So I could bring in my creative spirit into that process. And the people who were on my team, they were also then through the process, I allowed them to do the same. And it was fascinating. If I think today of all the dilemmas organizations have with so-called productivity, I think they just missed the boat completely because those people in our team, I'd rather say our team than my team, were so present and in the flow because of that creative spirit being part of their role, whether it was administrative or not.
Mm.
And they had the freedom to go with the flow because they delivered what they were supposed to deliver, but it was not according to traditional timelines.
Yeah.
And but we had so much fun. We always laughed. There was so much laughter and fun and joy.
It's so
We were lucky we were on a separate floor of the rest of the
yeah.
organization. And when people walked in there, they say, but you guys are always happy. But it's because we were in that creative flow.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Yes, that's absolutely true. I remember I was terrified of public speaking when I first started my business, and all of a sudden it hit me that I'm going to always have to be out in front of people, and especially if I'm coaching, facilitating, leading, and wanting to build my business, I'm going to have to. And I would freeze, and I started taking Toastmasters, which was helpful. But then all of a sudden I started taking improv theater classes. And at the end of my improv class, I would be like, oh, now I could talk to anyone and do anything because we were laughing so much and breaking our patterns and creating new neural pathways and doing everything. And so that's when I started. So improv theater changed my life, literally. Like it opened up a whole new world through doing it because it got me out of my fear of public speaking into the joy of creating and co-creating. And at one point I would plan everything out in my speeches. And then it got like, oh, I so much more trust the moment more than I trust anything I would have planned outside of the moment anyway, in certain things.
Yeah.
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 Certain
Well,
things you do need to plan for sure. But it helped me really take my emergence to a new level and be really responsive and adaptive and think on your feet.
yeah.
And so, but the fun part was what I was thinking about when you said, there's so much laughter creates endorphins, creates space. And all of a sudden, when you have all those endorphins flowing, like it sounds like your team did, you so many more possibilities open up.
Of course, yes, totally. Now, funny enough, I was also a Toastmaster and I didn't stay long. It was wonderful, but I didn't stay long. It was too structured for my brain. So, which takes me to, I know you are deeply involved with whole brain creativity. And because that was what was struggling with me with formal types of public speaking like that,
Mm-hmm.
that it somehow my zest for freedom to express myself in whichever way, it was inhibiting it in some way, even though it's a beautiful process. There's nothing wrong with it, especially people who's afraid to go onto the stage and to speak publicly. But it really brings me immediately to whole brain creativity and whole brain expression. I would call it whole person expression. That I'm wondering in the world that we currently live in, what would happen if we just look at the world through both our hemispheres, for our whole brain, not just the fear, fear-induced um, situations, but if we have the opportunity and the chance to really just look at you wearing glasses, I always think of bifocals. You see out of both eyes, one might be different from the other one, but you can see a whole picture. But it seems like as humanity, we have a bit of imbalance there. So I'm curious, what do you think? How do you feel? I'm not even saying think. How do you feel about people being exposed to whole brain creativity? How it can help us to better approach and respond to what's currently happening in the world and how we view the future?
Well, I love that question because it's, the essence of everything I do. The signature of my company is that every single thing we do is whole brain, whole body, whole person, whole being kind of creativity. So it's more than just creative thinking, it's creative being, creative navigating, creative interacting, creative responding. So I truly believe that is the path toward a more generative, life-giving future. Um, you know, the beautiful thing about whole brain thinking and or creative thinking, which is in my mind real creative thinking, and being is whole brain and whole person. But the beautiful thing about that is that you're never stuck with what is. You're never stuck with the world that is around presenting itself or what has been. One of sometimes people do an approach to the future or imagining a future as an extension of what was in the past. And I think in terms of a yes and to that. For real creative thinking, a yes and to that is opening up to different parts of thinking, the visual mind, the intuitive mind, the spatial mind, the imagination into what could be that what never existed. Because I think that when we start getting into our imagination of what can be that never existed, and we start learning to trust our impulses of the world we'd love to see. What's a world we'd love to live in? What's a world we'd want the next generation to live in? What is the world we'd love to see, rather than spin a loop, doing a lot of looping around the world as it is. I think about the way I look at it is, when you're starting a business. When you're starting a business, the people that make their business work for long periods of time are the ones that stay focused on their vision, their goals, their missions. They are aware of what's going on in the world. They might even respond and adapt and serve it, but they stay centered in their vision and their goal. And so I think creative thinking is what frees us to do that. We there's always infinite ways to imagine something different. And beginning to imagine something different and visualize, envision, and then is the first step of being able to start to create something different. And so a lot of it's, where do we put our ground of being? Where do we put our center? Are we putting it into the contraction, or are we using the contraction toward the new expansion? Think about in life, everything's creativity, everything in nature, new birth. Anytime something new wants to be born, it goes through in a contraction. Something wants to maintain the status quo. Expansion, something new wants to be born. Contraction, expansion. Now, all mothers know, all animals know, like you go through that, and eventually the new birth, they would never stop at the contraction and say, this is so terrible, so uncomfortable. I guess I shouldn't just have a baby. Like you keep going. And I feel this very similarly about it when we want to create something new. We are going to bump up against the status quo. We're going to bump up against old thinking. We're going to bump up against our own old patterns, our own old beliefs, approaches, and also those in the world. And then we kind of get called to even go deeper into ourselves to start thinking in different ways, imagining, maybe drawing it out. That's whole brain, non-verbally, just drawing it, moving it out in our body, dancing it out. There's many ways,
Mm-hmm.
dialoguing it out, making it a character, make it anthropomorphize, have tell stories from a future time. But there are many ways to start to move into a direction that's unknown, but is you get to discover and co-create as you go.
I love the way you share that. I love it. Absolutely love it. And you immediately make me think of at least two people. It's believed that if you just look at Einstein and Newton from a scientific point of view, Einstein was forever curious. He knew there was this thing. He didn't know what it was. He said himself, he didn't know what it was that he will discover. He just had this impulse. I must explore this and discover more about whatever this is. He didn't know what it was in the beginning. It's like the baby. You can't see it for 9 months. You're
Yeah.
aware of there's something growing inside of you as a mother, but you have no idea what it's going to look like, the personality or anything like that. It's not visible. It's like the seed underneath the soil as well. We can't see what's going on there when it's gestating under the soil. It's in the dark that it happens. And then we might feel that when it comes through the soil, it might be painful for that poor seedling. Like suddenly it loses its husk, it changes form. Just imagine that, but it's a natural process. But what I wanted to say about Einstein specifically is he was not a continuation of Newton. It was something
Mm-hmm.
completely different than Newton's laws of gravity and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I might be wrong, but I think Van Gogh has saying we're not staying long enough present with something. We are not able to see more because we're not staying long enough present with something. But that means we're in the present moment, full moment present awareness. And like you say, the impulse drives us forward. That of this whatever this life, it's life generating, it's life giving. So we're staying focused on that, but we are fully present in the moment as well.
Yes.
But otherwise, our awareness go outside of our bodies, and then we go into fear because then it feels very unsafe for the body as well.
Right. And certainly if your imagined futures are fear-based, that's even
Yeah.
double. Yeah, I think it is that both and. I always call it in my own work when I'm sort of in my own centering and meditations, I ask to be present to what's now and next. Now, staying in the moment, and then next, the unfolding. Like in an improv, you are fully in the moment, and you're I used to be in a group where you created full-length improv plays. You're fully in the moment. There's nothing planned in advance. You have no idea what's going to emerge. You're simultaneously having to be present, so you serve the scene, they called it. You step up, like you help co-create what's next. Sometimes that is the moment means you're sitting back, you're just letting something unfold. Other times it means you step in and you do what's yours to do. It's kind of like being present allows you to know what's yours to do. So it's sort of a paradox. The paradox is you're fully present so you can actually take action when the impulse arises to it. And I think it's a long time learning. I don't think, it's not something you would just decide, like, I'm going to stay present.
Yeah.
This is something, from meditators to creators to athlete, there's a presencing process and different people present in different ways. But I think creativity is a beautiful way to get that. One other thing I wanted to speak to that I think you said with the Van Gogh quote was, I noticed this in my work. I've worked 25 years with organizations and all kinds of people in that and entrepreneurs. And the ones who tend to be seen as and thought of as the most creative and innovative are not necessarily smarter than anyone else, and they're not more creative as far than anyone else. They tend to they're able to stay in the divergent space longer. They're able to stay in that unknown, ambiguous, uncertain space longer. They're not more creative. They just don't shut it down. They stay in discovery, exploration, unknown longer. And that, and then the creative unconscious, the source of creativity within us will reveal things if we stay long enough present to it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that also reminds me of when we are present and quiet as well, when the mind's not all over the place. How can an idea come to us if our mind is all over the place?
Yeah.
But there was something
Right.
else when you said that, but something else that immediately popped up was trust. For that, one must be able to trust life and the moment, to be
Yeah.
able to know it's your turn now. You have to step up into the
Yeah.
process, yes. And also trust the process. So there's a sense of I immediately feel that somehow on another level, it cultivates self-worth and self-esteem, which I think is a lot we can do these days with what's going on in the world.
I love that you're saying that it is connected. So, first of all, with trust the process, that's actually one of the principles that people will say in improv too,
Mm.
and in many, trust the process. And it does take a little time, when you're first learning improv, or like just like the baby walking across the carpet, they first learn, they fall, they get up. Although the baby never judge themselves and say, well, I guess I'm not designed to walk, or I guess I'm
Mm.
a loser, I can't make it. They just get back up and keep going, get back up until eventually they really trust. Same with improvisers. When you're improvisers, when you first starting, and even seasoned improvisers will do it. You'll say something that was like you jumped in too soon, or it didn't land, or it didn't work. You're constantly making mistakes. So I think that trust the process part was a very important part of what you said. And then the second thing, just was what was the second thing you just said? We're talking about improv. I lost it. But
Oh,
but the
but
whole
trust, but so trust life,
the
trust
self-esteem. Yeah, I'm sorry.
self-esteem. So yes, self.
The
Yeah.
self-esteem.
Mm.
So um yes, I think creative empowerment and agency does a lot for your self-esteem. A lot of people will rely on third party knowledge or third party. And of course, in a field you have no knowledge about, that you have to. There's some there, I know nothing about cars. I'm going to rely on my mechanics to tell me what's going on. I could rely on my own intuition or my own instinct to know what I feel about what they're telling me, but I don't know anything about. But what happens, I think one of the biggest things I've noticed, that people begin to feel empowered through what they discover on themselves.
Mm.
And so there's no shortcut in discovery. Discovery means you're going to be in the unknown about something, and then you're in the exploration space. So you're in pure unknown until you start to discover, and then you could discover a little more and discover a little more. And some discoveries happen I know a lot in my facilitation, a lot of my discoveries would happen by me trying things, and a lot of them did not work out, or part of it worked and part didn't. And
Mm.
well, what could I do better? What could I do different? Sometimes I'd even ask the group, what would have made that work better? And then I started discovering and learning, and that I know that built up a lot more confidence. Uh, I think if you're willing to be in discovery, you can get much more confident
Mm.
in yourself and in your own navigating the world, and also in discerning what you buy into or don't buy into that other people tell you.
Mm.
When you're not confident um, in yourself, or where you don't have a sense of sort of your own creative self, your own inner agency, then you're more likely to go along with something that, whether it may or may not feel right for you. And so I think it to your point about when you start using creativity, when you start getting in, when you start creating, when you start discovering, when you start to feel a sense of agency, and when you have a sense of agency, you feel just a little bit more trusting in yourself
Mm.
in the world.
Yes. Yeah. So I think that's why for me it's really important that we embrace that creative spirit in ourselves, especially in times where we feel where there's a lot of uncertainty, volatility, and things going on that we can't control, is to go into that curiosity, discovery, state of mind, what is going on here? Instead of just, oh wow, this is happening, and you're going straight into fear. So you block then what's possible to emerge because you are immediately putting a barrier in front of you. You build a wall, an invisible wall around you, so ideas in any way can't come to you. Any aha moment can't reach you because you already have a wall around yourself because of that
Yeah.
fear. Yeah. So I think it's really
Yeah,
important
and
for
it's
us to know
hard.
that. Yeah. Mm.
I mean, it's hard. Every one of us can get triggered,
Yeah,
every one
yeah.
of us can feel afraid. So creativity isn't about exactly, it's not about rising above fear, but when you go, it's about knowing that you might feel afraid. And maybe sometimes you have to feel the fear and but feel it fully until the energy
Mhm.
moves,
Mhm.
and then something else. But whether you feel the fear or not, or feel whatever it is, I know like sometimes creativity can be very uncomfortable in many ways, and sometimes really fearful, or things happening outside of you. It's knowing that there's a place in you that can give you more options and choices. There's a place inside of us, and the creative process itself can expand how you hold yourself and expand how you hold a situation. At least open it enough till you find some movement within it. And sometimes that may take days or weeks, or sometimes it may take moments. And it is a learning process. But yeah, it is true that if you're, um, when we go into binary thinking, right, wrong, good, bad, all like, and we shut down in just pure fear, it's so hard to access our own creativity. And if we need to create for our work, or we want to create in our lives, it's very hard if we're completely shut down. So holding that, even in the face of fear and the feeling of it, holding that there's still there are other options and truths and ways of moving, um, can feel empowering, knowing that I may not feel that today. I may not even be able to think of that today, but I know it's there. So it helps me
Mhm.
trust the process.
Mhm. And something you said now also triggered with me about breaking patterns, because if we're stuck in a pattern, it's very hard to get out of it.
Yeah.
So in your
Yes.
experience, because you've even written about it, how can, especially in the world that's so fast, everything is so quick, it's rapid changes. How can how can we break those patterns that's holding us back, that keep us in fear, perhaps? Because like you said, it's very difficult to come out of it and to access our creativity. But when we're stuck in a pattern, how do we get unstuck?
Yeah, well, that is a great question. So I'll answer it in sort of two ways. Like there's certain ways that where I don't, my work isn't focused on, and that is like in the like someone who's deeply traumatized, there's a mental
Mm,
health, like this is not anything I'm going to say right now is not
mm,
instead
mm,
of anybody's mental health
mm,
processes,
mm,
or provide practitioners you work with. This is through the lens of creativity to break
mm,
patterns.
mm,
So I did write a book called Pattern Breaks, all about breaking patterns. Because so first of all, every creative act is a pattern break. You can't have, because um, creativity by its nature is there's something, one way you break a pattern, and there's now something else. Everything in nature has a break of a pattern. Sameness doesn't produce something new,
mm,
a break in a pattern. So many times in our lives, these breaks in our patterns come from the outside. They're put onto us. When somebody, all of a sudden a car hits someone out of nowhere, that's a break in the pattern.
mm,
And
mm,
then now they might have to redirect and do something. Uh, where I focus on is by consciously choosing to break your patterns and get in such a habit of being a pattern breaker that when life's patterns break, when life breaks patterns for you, you can be more adaptive and resilient. So for example,
mm,
there's many ways to, any kind of creative prompt is a pattern break. Asking a question in a new way, thinking of something different, getting up thinking of a question and then laying on the floor and thinking of just the moving in the space,
Mm.
thinking of a question, writing the answers with your opposite hand, thinking of a question, drawing it out. There's um, countless ways to break, use timelines, break, like right now, here's our world. Let's go into imagined future or a parallel universe. How would that look? Or a future, so, but it's very much consciously choosing to break a pattern, often through fun,
Mm.
lighthearted, creative prompts that make it fun. You do that enough, then when unwanted or unsolicited, sometimes they're wanted,
Mm.
sometimes they're fantastic, or unwanted pattern breaking happens to you, you are able you trust yourself more to be resilient and adapt. There's so many things um, that can happen and that are unplanned. And then how some people seem the same thing can happen to two people, and both of them are it's jarring.
Mm.
But then one seems 3 days later to kind of be back moving forward, and the other is still holding. So
Mm.
I feel a lot pattern breaking frees you from the holding patterns. If you're responding, if for those of us, and I think we all have them somewhere in ourselves, but for those who hold patterns a lot, by doing pattern breaking consciously, it frees you from being a pattern holder. So when it is time, or when you want to, or life happens and brings you a pattern break, it becomes easier and you kind of bounce back
Mm.
quicker. Or all of a sudden, don't you might initially go into fight, flight, or freeze. But when you have practice in pattern breaking, you can break out of that pattern more quickly through. And so I advocate, I'm in my book, I'll have 18 templates, but there's so many more of different ways to
Mm.
break patterns
Mm.
that can be fun, engaging, joyful, and functional and work.
Which one do you like the most of the ones in your
Oh,
book?
um, oh my. Well, I love variety.
Mm.
So for me, I have to break patterns with my pattern breaking techniques. So there's
Yeah.
certain ones I do, certain improv based techniques, certain brain gym techniques, certain storytelling. I kind of drawing. I do a lot of drawing or painting, and I love to do dialoguing. Um, I would say I put the ones in my book that I tend to really like,
Mm.
because I've seen them work, and I've tried all of them and they've all worked for me in some way. I like metaphorical thinking of things different.
Mhm.
I don't know if there's a best. I will say the improv's so much fun. It's so much fun. But sometimes I'm couldn't be happier when I'm just like get immersed in a painting and just going on and on. And I might paint a concept. And sometimes I will paint a concept of what is, or sometimes I'll paint a concept of, and just the energy of it, abstractly, of what I would want it to be. And then I might paint the middle of how you get there. So I would say for me, I love mixing it up because each
Mm.
type of pattern break gives me something different. And
Mm.
sometimes if I'm trying one, like if I try one thing and it's not working, I then go, all right, let's try something else. There's an improv game called
Mhm.
New Choice. And I'm like, okay, new choice. Let's try something else.
Ah, I love what you're saying. It reminds me of a famous coach. He was mentoring football players in the US. He wrote a book about his process that he used to coach these young boys to play football. And he realized that through his research and working with them, he realized that our brains work in a different, not all our brains work the same, we all know that, but the electric charges that goes off for a soccer player is very different from somebody who's a pianist.
Mm,
Because a pianist must perfect that piece to the T. It's the same over and over and over, the same neural pathway over and over and over. Whereas the soccer player is now this, then that, now this, then that, now that, then now this. So it's a continuous change
Yes,
of gears,
right.
so to speak, as well. Tempo, rhythm. And what you just shared made me think of that. Like I'm also more like the soccer player. I used
Yeah.
to play the piano as well, but I love the guitar because the guitar had more freedom than the piano in some way. I could improvise on the guitar, which I couldn't really do that much on the piano. But when I read his book, it was just amazing. So, okay,
Oh, I love
now I know why I can play very beautifully, but I didn't love it. It was kind of restrictive to me. So I think sometimes we people think they are not creative because they somehow in their childhood in the past, so they did something that was against their true nature, so to speak, in that sense, like now this, then that, now this, then that.
it.
But I've also seen people who are deeply immersed in a process and who then, you can catalyze the other way of thinking, the other way of doing things as well. So both are available to us. It's just one
Yes.
is more dominant, one is just more dominant. Mm.
Absolutely. And some people lean more toward, you know, divergent thinking, and some lean more toward convergent. Some are a little bit more left brain oriented, some are more right brain oriented. We all have access to all. And being whole brain means being able to navigate all. But what you're saying is, I've noticed that without exception, that there are different creative styles and different people will come alive in different ways, like the soccer player or the pianist, and both are, when you find your style, it helps you find the places in creativity you come most alive. I always, love people that can really act, and they can captivate and take us deep in. They're amazing actors in
Mhm.
theater, and there's so much creativity into it. It's sort of like the pianist. Um, and yet my personality for me is more like the improv, you
Mm,
know,
mm,
the being more in the moment. Now, that doesn't mean that I've taken a few acting classes and I've always got huge benefit. But for
mm,
me, I'm
mm,
more designed for improv, whereas some other people are more designed for theater. And I know, like, I love improv. And I remember one time a stand-up comedian was saying, "Oh, I think improv would be the hardest thing." And I thought, oh my gosh, like, to me, because there's an ensemble and you're bouncing back, like there's a
mm.
whole, that to me feels so much safer than stand-up comedy. I thought, to me, that would be the hardest thing in the world. And even though I do comedic improv, I think stand-up comedy would be truly the most challenging thing in the world. And so it is funny the way, one person's aliveness is someone else's, can't even imagine.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is true. We all have, and it is very sad because many people have not been socialized or educated in ways that support their creativity. I know, many people uh, were truly, their teachers or parents or people in the community did not know how to support. It's not even that they didn't want to, somebody is raised to think a certain way, and then all of a sudden they see a child drawing, and the child's like this, creating all these imaginative worlds, and then somebody's like, "Oh, but you didn't stay in the lines, so that's bad." And then that, now this beautiful imaginative child who could create worlds, believes they're not creative. One of a technique I have people do sometimes is, there's a creativity story, and there's two, sometimes I'll have people tell their creativity story. Sometimes I have them tell it and act it out. And sometimes I just have it nonverbal where they're just acting it. But what's true to almost everyone adult that I work with, their creativity story is, there was for most, at least most people, I would say over 35, like I don't
Mm,
know as much about, but there was a time with the older generations where they had this natural exuberant creative period, and something shut it, creative playfulness, something shut it down. And then they had to kind of work to
Mm,
reconnect, or are still in the process of that. That is the one thing I would hope. And one thing I always hope the most of is that, when people leave the workshops or anything I do, is that they feel they remember and know that they are infinitely creative.
mm,
That whoever, anything anyone told them or that they came to believe was not right, every one of us is. We don't all create the same way. We might not fit into, uh, our creativity might not fit into a certain, norm in
mm, mm,
a school, the way a school say, oh, you're smart if this, and somebody else has a creativity that doesn't look
mm,
like that. But where everybody is so creative, and so pattern breaking, no matter who you are, can help you access more of that.
mm. I love what you say. I was one of those who refused to draw, to color in between the lines as a child. I was just very stubborn. I just refused. I didn't even write on the top line of a page. I refused. It somehow, and still today, you'll see, whenever I do, I love writing with my hand. I'm a writer by writing is my thing. But I
Mm,
will always use blank paper. I cannot write on lines. My mind refuse.
I love it.
My mind refuse
Oh, that's
absolutely.
great. Yes. Well,
But
that is
so
one of the pattern breaking things.
yeah,
Only online paper. I also do only online for my, even in my journals, and right. But I love it. That's great that you just naturally do that.
yeah. But as a child, I was luckily stubborn enough not to believe that,
Oh
that
yeah,
that
that's
if
good.
you didn't color in between the lines, you're not creative. But something you mentioned about being creative and the way we were educated and brought up reminds me of a family member who who is extremely mathematical, scientific brain, absolutely genius, absolute genius. And then with his daughters, they are so artistic, not even just creative, they're artistic. They paint the most beautiful things and they sing most beautifully. They're just so talented and gifted. But because he has this left brain dominance of being a brilliant scientist and engineer, he imposed that on them. And they struggled with maths and science. And I was visiting once, and I was always feeling very sad just to think of their absolute creative spirit must die every day because they are so stuck in this left brain type world. And it's imposed on them, so it's not from the inside out. There's nothing wrong if you are like that. I mean, just to say that as well. But then I took the one, and she was really struggling with her maths at high school, and I showed her how she can use her art to understand maths and science. And today she's an engineer. She was really struggling to pass maths at school at that time. But using her creative abilities, she mastered it and she was really shining in it as well. So I think we mustn't underestimate the power because, like you said, it's whole brain. And the
Yes.
one can create a space for the other one.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why it's almost painful when somebody says, well, we'll get to that art stuff after the real work, because the art stuff can inform the real work. It can actually, if you go into the right brain first and then go into the left brain dominant work that you might need to get done for your company or your job or whatever it is, your work will be different than if you didn't first go into the right brain. You'll have more options and creative. So you just were helping her, and I feel like, think about how people develop first pre-verbal, they're kind of like, and then they kind of get into the left brain. We we've gotten it backwards where, we lead everything from the left brain. But one of the pattern breaks I like to do in my workshops is take people into right brain kinds of things first before we get in the left brain. Even if I'm working with clients where they have very serious problems to solve or visions to create or products that they're developing, we first always go into the right brain because that will change what they get, their ideas. That will expand. what you were doing with her, expanded the options and playing fields that then she could go do her work much more fully and creatively.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah, and
great.
what you express now for me is you are when you activate or stimulate the right brain first, you go into receptive state, so you are available to so much more. Whereas with the left brain, it's very focused on one point. This is it. It cannot really see anything besides what's in front of it here. So your options are obviously then limited.
Yeah.
And in that receptive, intuitive, then you also your intuitive creativity comes out as well. So you're
Yeah.
not just receptive to what's out there, but it's in from inside, it comes out. And that's
Yeah.
powerful. And that's powerful, yes.
So that's the divergent space, like when that's hanging out there for a while for, the distinguishing uh, aspect of creative thinking is you do go into divergent space. Many meetings, people will go, okay, we've gathered the data, we've analyzed the data, and we're structuring it and forming it and shaping it and um, putting it into categorizing it and then taking action steps. And if there's zero unknown and it's just A to B and you know where you're going, that's fine. But if you want to create or think differently or generate options, you must go into a divergent space first. And in divergence, that's why in creative process they talk about which is 100% true just in universal creativity is like non-judgmental space. You bring in discernment and judgment in the convergence, but you leave for a while, go into divergence, do the right brain. That's why a lot of ideas come when people are walking or running in the
Mm,
shower, not necessarily in the boardroom when their
mhm,
boss says be creative,
mm,
or their teacher says be creative. Everybody take risks, be creative. That doesn't work so much. But then when you've allowed and go into divergent space, then you go into the convergence, which is more the left brain. So it has a place. We've just done it backwards. We people don't they're when they leave the left brain, they all of a sudden they think I'm not seeing where this is going. I don't see how this makes sense. So they bring it back. Let's reel it in. Let's reel it in. Let's reel it before letting it wildly go out.
mhm,
Like
mhm.
it's wildly undisciplined plus completely focused disciplined. Both make the creative process,
Yeah,
but let the wild undisciplined be first.
yeah.
Then take all the new information or data or ideas or thoughts or images or impulses that emerge and then structure it through convergence. And then that's when we really love that left brain focus.
Mm, yeah, yeah. And as you were speaking as well, I was immediately thinking of visionary thinking. So when we
Mm,
go into strategic process, mostly, almost 99% of the time, people go in the left brain focus
yeah,
immediately. And I always say, but I mean, we don't have to even quote famous wise ones from before, but we know there's just doing the same thing over and over and over because you're stuck in what was. You're not opening in what's to come, the next that you're speaking about, the future, what's possible, of the world of the possible. You don't even
yeah,
have the opportunity to go in there because you still approach the same issues, perhaps with the same mindset, and you're
exactly.
in that groove and you can't get out of it. And then it's the same of the same old, same old. But like you said, it's a both and, but it's where you start. But I always say to people, for me, it doesn't even make logical sense that you sit between four walls doing a strategy session because you can't see outside of it. So how can
Yeah,
you have any vision for what you want, where you want to go to, if you are in the same room, but you are surrounded by walls? And like that's why I love what you said, you go for a walk or sitting outside in nature or yeah,
break a pattern
yeah,
is leaving
exactly.
it. I
Yeah.
love what you're saying. I remember even before I started the work, or at the very beginning, I'd say my early days of my work, I read this book, and I to this day wish I would have remembered the name of it. But what they did was they had done a bunch of research and study on creativity in different environments, and they put people from the highest level of brain activation and creativity and creative output to the lowest level. And they found the highest level, the people that opened their creativity most were by the waterfalls because the negative ions, and it just really creates this, it opens up the right brain, the whole brain a
Mm-hmm.
lot. And then they had different, and the lowest level was in a boardroom with no windows,
Mm-hmm.
which so many meetings happen. And I always stuck with me, and I felt like it kind of validated and confirmed, the direction I was feeling called to go, because everything that was a pattern that didn't serve creativity.
Mm.
So I love that you just said that, because it's exact, the research was saying that as well.
Yeah. So I've got another question for you as we're on that topic of boardrooms. If we think of the drive for productivity these days, a lot of leaders make decisions based on productivity and numbers and things like that. If you're sitting with somebody of a CXO level, a leader in front of you, executive, and they perhaps have some kind of dilemma, whatever it might be. Immediately for me, what comes up is to take them in, into a process of thinking outside the box, creative thinking, all these different kinds of thinking. What would you tell them, or how would you approach it that they can feel comfortable and safe? Because I discovered many times they feel uncomfortable to approach a situation which that they cannot control, especially something like productivity these days. So for me, the medicine, I would say, to productivity or any issue that you think you have about productivity is creativity.
Yes, right.
So, but how would you get that message across to them that they can even just consider that you have the structured way you think about being productive, which is a 19th century belief system, and then to gently guide them into experiencing the possibilities that's hiding in creativity of how we show up in the world. There's that sense of, I want to do my best. I want to bring all of me, my whole person, my whole brain, my whole being.
Yeah,
Because we don't just hire a left brain or a right brain. We
right.
hire a whole person. So I
Yes,
was curious about how would you approach such a situation when somebody has that mindset of
yes. Oh,
productivity is everything, but you want to
yes.
bring in the creative side.
Yes. So, and I work with people like that all the time. I work with
Mhm.
executives and leaders all the time who have a more conventional, um, pastor mindset, or now. So first of all, with me and my company being the Center for Creative Emergence, and if they've hired me or if I'm there, there's already something in them that's open to something different, or I would not have been their choice. If I don't, I'm the Center for Creative Emergence, not the productivity expert. Um, Even though, ironically, when they get creative, the productivity skyrockets. But so already they're already going to know that I'm going to be a little bit of a different approach. So if they weren't open at all to that, they probably wouldn't have even brought me in or hired me. Um, But second of all, what you're speaking to just in general, like, there's something, and I do write about this in my book, but it's a big thing in my work. There's, resistance does happen. And so what I first say to them is, I can promise you that what I'm going to take you through, it's proven, it'll work, it's effective, and it's safe, but I can't promise you it's going to be comfortable, because discomfort is often part of the creative process. And I explain to them how resistance shows up, the resistance of the chick. This is trying to hold the chick back, and there's this dynamic tension, something new wants to be born, and the status quo, and there's this little dynamic tension that's uncomfortable, but the chick eventually pecks through and goes. You feel the bud feels the resistance of the flower, feels the resistance of the bud most before it's going to bloom. So if they want to be more creative or more productive and use creativity for it, I'm saying there's a chance that, and where everybody's creative style is different. For some people, it's exuberant. Other people, they'd rather be anywhere else in that moment, but not discomfort. And so I just invite them to know that the discomfort is resistance is normal. Anything that shows up along their path of, judgments, resistance, stories they'll tell, that's a natural part of the shell that's trying to protect the status quo, and that resistance is normal, and that we will do things to work through it. Like I'm sort of the midwife to help people through that resistance. So that's one, because usually I'm not in front of anybody who isn't open to talking at all about creativity. That it's not my world. So they're already at least open, but they still might have all this fear and judgment. And a lot of them, and certain things like I've had to overcome, people thinking like, are we in elementary school? Like I remember one time, trying these things, or one time working with a group of, I've worked a lot with a group of government executives. I remember when I first started, one guy goes, your tax dollars at work, ladies and gentlemen. He was like, couldn't believe like we were doing improv, to help these senior leaders and policymakers that impacted world but by the end they didn't say that. And so I joke with them, here's what you might be thinking, and let's check it. My invitation is that you go through the process anyway and know the discomfort's normal. There's nothing wrong with you. Know that you might, and my invitation is stay with it. Because the worst thing ever that can happen is you'll go, yeah, I didn't like that. But the best thing, and what happens literally 100% of the time, is something new will emerge. You will expand. You will see yourself or the creative process or the goal you're trying to reach or the productivity you're trying to achieve in a new way. There was going to be more expansiveness and spaciousness. So I really do a lot in helping people work through and navigate resistance. And there's many techniques for it, but that's a big, you nailed like a real issue, is that many people don't know they have that resistance. They really think it's real. Like they'll think, this is ridiculous. This is what we need to be realistic, and approach this realistically and left brain dominant. They don't know the more real is the whole brain. And that will give them more answers, more solutions, more opportunities, more productivity. So that's one way I do it.
I love that. You mentioned now about what's emerging. So if we just generally think of the future, it's the next moment. It's not like it's 10 miles away. It's just in front of us. So it's not that far from us. How can we use creativity to approach the future in a more prepared way? That whether it helps us with this uncomfortable, this judgment, the fear that we might hold. And sometimes, like you say, it's unconscious. It's not necessarily conscious. But how can we embrace creativity while we're in a process of change, or when we just think about the future? Because I think sometimes it's the thinking about that creates the fear. It's not really the future. It's how we see it and how we think about it. So we are projecting it outwards. And then obviously that's our experience most of the time.
That's a beautiful way of saying it. Yes, so I have two answers. One is, that would take so much time to talk about because it's such a big question. And two is the first step in my mind of practices. You're basically looking at how do you create the conditions for a thriving emergence. Next is sort of like a gardener would look at, how do I create the conditions for these plants to emerge? I can't see them. I need to make sure they have sunlight. I need to make sure they have water. I need to make sure that the soil is healthy, that they have plant food, whatever it is. There's conditions. So what you do have, you may not see what's emerging, but you can start creating conditions for it. And to help you get present. And also, how do I learn discernment to recognize what's the difference between a real impulse, like something that really has legs, something that can, or the shiny object, oh, that looks fun. That, a lot of people are like, oh, that looks fun. That looks fun. That's fun. And what's versus this is what I'm really, so I would say, One is thinking in terms of conditions. How do I create the conditions? Because that's the thing you can control
Yeah,
anywhere
yeah,
along.
yeah, yeah.
Um, allowing space in the unknown to just start exploring. What does this feel like? What if I did, what ifs, tons of what ifs,
Mhm.
and without rushing it,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
sort of like no matter how much you rush a seed, it's not going to sprout before its natural time.
Mhm.
You know,
Exactly. Yeah.
um, you're creating the conditions and then you're just giving yourself, this is the most important condition, I believe, the first step, space, time, and attention. You
Yeah.
get more what you reinforce. So what happens is somebody will be very, very busy. They want more creativity. They want more productivity. They want more results or different results or new ideas, but they don't allow any space, time, and attention
Mm,
on their creative self, on nurturing their inner creator, which we all have, right?
mm,
Or a more right brain. So even if it's something like 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, an hour a day, to just have non-judgment time of exploration at first, space, time, and attention is the first step. Thinking about what conditions can you help, and so conditions sometimes mean for the next hour, no calls, no email, no matter what. I'm not checking anything. Conditions
mm,
might mean I'm getting out and taking a walk, or conditions might mean I'm going to have a place in my house, which is my creativity space. It's
mm,
different for
mm,
there's,
mm. Yeah.
but what are the conditions you want to nurture, and then give it space, time, and attention. And I would say those are the first steps to cultivating emergence.
Oh, that's beautiful. And that brings me to your book. Why don't you just show us your book, Pattern
Okay.
Breaking? Pattern
Um,
Breaks,
Here it is.
a
Pattern
facilitator's
break.
guide to cultivating creativity.
Yes. And it has very much templates. It has principles, it has practices, it has activities, it has templates, it has philosophies. It talks like it's anything from very philosophical about sort of creativity and and how to actualize it to different principles as a facilitator coach. It's for leaders, facilitators, coaches, or anyone who wants to bring creativity out of themselves or their groups, community organizers, and it helps. And it is all about breaking patterns and going into different ways of thinking and being first. And there's 90 of this, the book is, I don't know, 200 page over, like, yeah, 270 pages, but there's a third of the book just has all techniques and
Mhm,
different ways of doing it. Um, and then there are lots of models and maps. And so
mhm,
it, it's not the book you would sit down probably and read in a weekend, because it's more of a reference
mhm,
guide. You
mhm,
keep coming
mhm,
back and learning more and thinking about.
mhm.
One day you might think about certain principles or how do I integrate, and another day it might be, oh, I'd like practices for this. So yeah.
That's amazing. So where can people get it? Where can they get hold of that book?
Sure. Well, it is on Amazon. You could
Mhm.
get there, or you could, if sometimes people don't remember it, or if they're in their car listening, they might not have time to. So patternbreaks.com will have a link to being able to buy it.
Great.
Patternbreaks.com.
Com- Yeah,
It's
and
also
we'll,
on my website, my
yeah,
business website, creativeemergence.com, and you'll see it. But the book, you can just go to patternbreaks.com and you'll be led to the Amazon link.
that's amazing. I think all of us should have that book.
Oh, thank you.
And we will also, at the end of this podcast, we'll also put the links to your book and also in descriptions on Spotify and on Patreon and on Google Podcasts as well, that people can
Oh,
access it from there
sure.
as well. But
Thank you.
thank you, Michelle. This was wonderful. I just feel life after this time with you. It's like literally life in my cells, what we shared and explored. And that to me is always, it's not even just hope. It's like there's possibility, we don't have to go into fear. There are other ways. And you've just expressed so many different ways how we can approach it and life
Oh, thank
generally and
you.
situations. Yeah. Yeah. So thank you so much for sharing this with all of us. And everybody, please reach out to Michelle. She's an amazing, I've done work together with her. She's an amazing facilitator.
As
And
are you, for
and
sure.
no, but seriously, it's if on this day of Future World Day, it's something to explore, definitely. And like Michelle, she is available virtually and in person. And
Thank
thank
you
you,
so much.
Michelle. I really appreciate you sharing the space and your wisdom and your experiences with us. It's also inspirational. You started way back with this, and you are a proverbial example of just staying focused on the impulse. It might change, like you said,
Mhm.
the establishment might change, but and life might change around us, but that impulse is just drawing us forward.
Yeah, thank you. That gets that right. No matter what's going on in the world, okay, given that this is happening, given the constraints, given that this is
Mm,
happening in the world, what's mine to do? How do I serve? How
yes.
do I create? Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this, Hannelie, and it's
Oh,
always great to talk to you. You're a very inspirational, life-giving person. So thank you so much for having me.
you're most welcome. Thank you, everyone. Take care.